I pressed my lips together, ready to blow out the candles, when a hand grabbed the back of my neck and slammed my face straight into the cake. The whole room exploded with laughter, and my son's laugh was the loudest. Frosting flooded my nose and eyes. Before I could even push myself up, my back slammed into the edge of the table, my head cracking, with a dull thud like a hammer driving a spike. I tasted metal blood mixed with sugar and heard someone say, "Don't be so dramatic, it's just a joke." But then the left side of my face went numb, like someone had cut a nerve. I looked up and saw my daughter-in-law smiling. Not a playful smile, but the smile of someone who had just successfully tested a trap. I stayed silent and quietly slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, touching the thing I always carry with me. If she thought this was a joke, then tomorrow morning someone would be calling the police for a very different reason. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts. And if it moved, you give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Calvin Hargrove, 66 years old, retired for 4 years. Before that, I worked as an inspection engineer for the state highway system, a job that wasn't glamorous but demanded the very thing I'd spent my whole life protecting: precision and responsibility. I'd stood under bridges in the middle of winter nights, listening to wind scream through steel beams, checking every weld because I knew a single small error could cost lives. I lived that way for 40 years. I believed in structure. I believed that if the foundation was strong enough, everything above it would stand. 4 years ago, my foundation collapsed when Evelyn, my wife, passed away after a long battle with cancer. We'd been together for more than 40 years. A small house in the suburbs, maple trees in the front yard, a garage always cluttered with tools. When she died, I reduced my life to a few habits: making coffee at 6 a.m., reading the printed newspaper, walking one lap around the neighborhood. I thought I'd learned how to live slower, live quietly. I believed that old age, if it didn't offer much joy, should at least come with respect. I have one son, Marcus, 38 years old. He has his own family now. 2 kids, my grandchildren. I'm not the kind of grandfather who shows up every weekend. I didn't want to intrude. I believed a bit of distance kept the peace. Maybe that belief is exactly why I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. My daughter-in-law's name is Tessa. If you met her at this party, and most people in the room tonight only knew that version, you'd see a perfect woman, a well-fitted dress, neatly curled hair, a smile at just the right moments, a warm, gentle voice. She'd touch my shoulder when people were watching, call me Dad, stretching the word just a little to sell the role. But when the crowd's attention shifted, her face changed. The smile shut off like a switch. Her words dropped low, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You're standing crooked. Don't eat so much. You look really old. You smell like an old person." You know that those comments fell steadily like dripping water, never loud, never enough for anyone else to challenge. I used to think it was just awkward phrasing. I told myself, let it go. It's family. Don't make a big deal. I believed that if I endured it, things would balance out on their own. That's why when Tessa called me a week ago, I let myself hope. Her voice on the phone was strangely sweet. "We're throwing you a birthday party." Marcus says, "We have to do it properly. You'll come right." I replayed that sentence in my head over and over, like a traveler hearing water in the desert. I told myself maybe she'd changed. Maybe Marcus had said something. Maybe this was a turning point. That morning, I ironed the light blue shirt Evelyn used to say matched my eyes. I polished my shoes until I could see the ceiling faintly reflected. I stopped by my usual liquor store and picked a mid-range bottle of Pinot Noir, not cheap enough to look careless, not expensive enough to seem showy. I stood in front of the mirror and told myself, "Go Calvin, at least give them a chance." Marcus and Tessa's house sat in a newer suburb, curving streets, neatly trimmed lawns. When I walked in, I noticed the first thing right away. Most of the guests weren't family. They were Tessa's friends, Marcus's co-workers, polite but distant faces. A happy birthday dad banner hung high, balloons gleaming. Everything looked like a carefully staged performance. Tessa hugged me just long enough for others to see. She took the wine bottle, glanced at the label, set it aside without comment. Then, as she passed by, she leaned close and whispered one short sentence. The warmth vanished instantly. I didn't respond. I'd learned that reacting only made things worse. Marcus was different. He was there, but not really there. He poured drinks, laughed at other people's stories, avoided my eyes. I waited for a moment, a pat on the shoulder, a simple question, anything to show I wasn't just a prop in a family photo. That moment never came. Then the cake came out. 66 candles burning bright. Tessa stood beside me, her hand on my back, like a supportive gesture, but the pressure felt like a warning. Make a wish, Dad. The room applauded. I leaned in and took a breath. I wished for peace. I wished Marcus would see what I'd seen too late. I wished Evelyn were there. The shove came before the breath left my lungs. I've already told the rest of that moment. Cake floor, blood, laughter. You're too sensitive. My ears rang. The room tilted. Someone stepped forward as if to help, but Tessa was faster. He's always dramatic, she said, half concerned, half playful. The crowd laughed awkwardly, like they needed an excuse to keep the party going. Only one person didn't laugh. Elaine Parker stood near the kitchen door, back straight, lips pressed tight. Ayla is a few years older than me. She'd been Evelyn's closest friend for decades. I caught her eye, not surprised but recognizing, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. I tried to sit up, but my arm wouldn't cooperate. A cold numbness spread from my cheek down my neck. I don't remember who helped me up or what anyone said. The images come back fragmented like chopped up film. What I do remember clearly is Tessa leaning close when everyone else turned away. Her breath at my ear, her voice low and even. Don't ruin tonight. You understand I didn't answer. I just clenched my hand inside my jacket pocket, touching that familiar object, a habit I'd kept since Evelyn was still alive. When you've spent long enough in a profession built on measuring and managing risk, you learn never to walk into the dark empty-handed. That night, I don't remember how I got home. I only remember the cold air outside headlights, stretching into long streaks, and the sharp sweetness of frosting still lingering in my nose. Lying in bed, still wearing the light blue shirt, I realized something. That shove hadn't been spontaneous. It was a test. And if I stayed silent, the next test wouldn't stop at cake. The next morning, I woke with a crushing heaviness, like someone had set a block of iron on my head overnight. The room was still my bedroom, but it felt unfamiliar because everything tilted. It took me a few seconds to realize it wasn't the furniture. It was my vision. One eye barely opened. My eyelid was swollen tight, my face burning, each heartbeat pounding straight into my temple like a sledgehammer. I tried to move, my neck was stiff as wood, my jaw flaring with pain when I clenched it lightly. I raised a hand to my face and touched uneven, swollen skin, the pain sharp enough to make me draw a slow breath through my teeth. I sat up carefully, waiting for the dizziness to pass. In that moment, last night's memories returned in fragments. Candle light, laughter, the cold cake, the blunt impact. I thought about the whisper in my ear and felt my stomach tighten. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The bright screen stabbed at my eyes. One unread message. Marcus just one line short and cold. Tessa says you should come clean the kitchen. You made a mess last night. I read it again, waiting for something after it. Are you okay? Or at least a question mark? There was nothing else, just an order passed along like I was a hired cleaner who'd left work unfinished. I set the phone down. The pain in my head gave way to something heavier in my chest. I'd spent years inspecting bridges that cracked under excessive load, knowing exactly when a structure could take no more. Reading that message, I knew something inside me had hit its limit. I decided to drive myself to the hospital. The idea of calling someone bothered me. Part pride, part denial that I wasn't okay. I put on a jacket buttoning it crooked because my hands were shaking. Stepping into the garage, the morning light hit my eyes and forced me to turn away. I opened the car door, sat down, and placed my hands on the steering wheel. As soon as I turned the key, a wave of dizziness hit, forcing me to bend forward until it passed. My hands weren't as steady as I'd thought. I stared at my fingers, trembling slightly, and for the first time in years, I doubted my own ability. Right then, there was a knock at the front door. 3 firm knocks. I opened it to find Elaine standing there, purse over her shoulder, car keys in hand. She looked at me for 1 second and exhaled, not surprised, but confirming something she'd feared. "Hospital now," she said. "No questions, no detours." I tried to protest, but the pain in my jaw turned my words into nonsense. Elaine had already turned toward the car, as if the decision had been made long ago. I followed step by careful step. She didn't say much on the drive, just glanced over now and then, focused and tense. I leaned my head against the cool window, watching familiar streets slide by without really seeing them. The emergency room was bright and loud, the smell of disinfectant sharp. Elaine spoke to the nurse at the desk, her voice steady. When my name was called, a young nurse helped me onto a gurney and wheeled me inside. I heard the wheels on the floor, the curtain pulling closed, the soft hum of machines. The doctor on duty was a middle-aged man, tall, with a calm voice. He introduced himself as Nolan Reyes. He asked basic questions, checked my reflexes, shined a small light into my eyes. I tried to answer clearly, but each sentence sent a jolt through my jaw. Dr. Reyes ordered a CT scan and X-rays immediately. I lay still inside the machine, listening to its steady whir. The waiting afterward felt longer than it probably was. When Dr. Reyes returned, he held a tablet. He stood at the foot of the bed, scrolling through images. I watched his face, a habit from my old job. I noticed the subtle changed lips, pressed together, brow tightening. He scrolled again, then stepped out without a word. I heard him speaking softly at the nurse's station. A few words carried through the noise. "Mandatory report." He came back with another nurse, pulled a chair close, and sat down, tablet on his knee. He looked at me not like a doctor explaining procedures, but like someone about to say something difficult. "Mr. Hargrove," he said slowly, "you have a fractured cheekbone with a crack extending toward the eye socket. We need to monitor for nerve damage, but that's not what concerns me most." He turned the screen toward me, pointing to faint white lines. "These marks are healed injuries at the temple, the jaw. They're not new." I swallowed. I fall sometimes," I said weakly. "Winter ice tripped on a rug once." Dr. Reyes shook his head almost imperceptibly. "The location and angles don't match common household accidents," he said. "They form a pattern." I went silent, all the excuses I'd rehearsed for years lined up in my head. Age, clumsiness, slowing down. Looking at those images, I realized how easily I'd said those things, as if I'd practiced them. "By law," Dr. Reyes continued, "I'm required to report suspected elder abuse. That isn't a choice for me." The room seemed to shrink. My heartbeat filled my ears. "That's not necessary," I said, nearly pleading. "It was just an accident. My family were fine." He met my eyes, not unkindly, but firmly. "I hear that a lot," he said. "Most of the time, it isn't true." A moment later, the curtain moved and a woman stepped in. She looked to be in her 40s, wearing a simple jacket and an ID badge. Her presence wasn't threatening, but it calmed the room. "I'm Dana Whitaker," she said. "I work with Adult Protective Services." She sat down slightly to the side, notebook on her lap, angled so it didn't feel like an interrogation. She asked simple questions. Where I lived, who brought me in. What happened last night, I described it as a joke, gone too far, an unlucky fall. I avoided Tessa's name, but every time Dana mentioned your daughter-in-law, my shoulders tensed without me realizing. Dana didn't interrupt. She wrote quietly occasionally, glancing up. When I finished, she closed her notebook. "What are you most afraid of if this becomes a bigger issue?" she asked. The question stopped me. I thought about embarrassment, about gossip, but deeper than that, I thought about Marcus, about losing the little connection I had left with my son. Dana seemed to understand. "Silence doesn't protect families," she said gently. "It only protects the person hurting you." The words hit me like a counterforce. I'd spent my life believing endurance kept the peace. Lying there with images of fractured bones on a screen, I wasn't so sure anymore. Dana handed me a business card and explained the next steps. "For now, don't contact your daughter-in-law," she said. "Save every message, every call." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. Tessa. The room went silent for a long second. I stared at the name, a chill running down my spine. I didn't need to open it to know the tone waiting inside. Dana looked at me and gave the slightest nod as if to say, "This is exactly what I mean." I didn't touch the phone, but for the first time I didn't look away either. Dana gently flipped the phone face down as if to say, "This story wasn't at that chapter yet." She looked back at me, voice calm and steady. "How would you describe your relationship with Tessa?" I didn't have to think long. The answer came out smooth, almost automatic. "Normal," I said. "We're not close, but there's nothing seriously wrong." The moment her name left my mouth, my hands started to shake. Not violently, just enough for me to notice. Dana noticed too. She didn't point it out. She just kept writing. Her silence unsettled me more than any question. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to piece memories together. Small things. I'd always called them small. Tessa changing dinner times without telling me, then saying I was late. Nights I stood at the door, ringing the bell, no one answering, then getting a text. "We thought you weren't coming." Comments dropped at just the right moments. "You're old. Your brain's slow. You don't make money anymore. Don't give advice." I remembered my father's old watch. My most treasured item vanishing from a drawer. When I asked, Tessa shrugged. "Maybe you misplaced it." I believed that. I laughed at myself, blamed my memory. I thought it was the cost of aging. But when the pieces sat side by side, they weren't random anymore. They formed a sequence, repeated and deliberate, each step cutting away a little more of my worth inside my own son's house. Dana set her pen down. "Are you familiar with isolation and manipulation?" she asked. I shook my head. "Isolation happens when someone is gradually cut off from support family friends without realizing it," she said. "Manipulation is when they're led to doubt their own perception. Gaslighting." The word was new, but the feeling wasn't. I thought about how I'd stopped telling friend stories because Tessa said I exaggerated. How I visited neighbors less because I didn't want to hear, "You look tired lately." How I'd shrunk myself believing silence was polite. "May I ask one more thing?" Dina said, her voice still gentle but her eyes growing serious. "Is there something that happened that you've never told anyone?" The question hung in the air. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Part of me wanted to keep it one small secret the way I had for months. But when I thought about the image of broken bones on the screen, about the words "mandatory report," I knew I could no longer keep calling it small. There was one time I said slowly, about 6 months ago in the hallway of their house. I was carrying a box upstairs. Tessa walked past. I don't know why. She pushed me. I paused and took a deep breath. Not hard, but hard enough for me to lose my balance. My shoulder slammed into the wall. If I'd taken one more step, my head would have hit the stairs. Dana didn't react. She just nodded slightly, encouraging me to go on. I didn't tell anyone. I admitted. I told myself it was an accident, that I was standing in the wrong place. Silence filled the room. I realized I was gripping the bedsheet so tightly, my knuckles had turned white. A familiar exhaustion washed over me, the kind that comes from carrying a secret for too long. Elaine was standing at the foot of the bed before I even noticed her. She stepped forward, her voice low but steady. Your wife was worried about this a long time ago. Her words made me turn sharply. No. I said so fast it sent a jolt of pain through my jaw. Evelyn is gone. That ended. Elaine looked at me, her eyes a mix of sadness and resolve. No, Calvin, she said. For her it didn't. She told the story slowly, as if every word had been weighed. That in the last months of her life, Evelyn had talked to her about the way Tessa treated me. That Evelyn had been afraid I would be taken advantage of once she was no longer there. That she had asked Elaine to keep an eye on things, to observe, to record, but not to intervene, because Evelyn knew I wouldn't listen if anyone tried to convince me directly. I sat there feeling as if someone had just pulled the rug out from under me. I had thought Evelyn's death was the end. I believed that after the funeral, after the condolences, her worries ended too. I never imagined she had been thinking so far ahead, farther than I ever did. Dana placed a small card in front of me, printed with a phone number and a few lines of text. This is a support hotline, she said. If you feel unsafe, they can help. Elaine rested a hand lightly on mine. You can stay at my place for a while, she said, just until things are clearer. I looked at the two women, one representing a system I'd spent years avoiding. The other, a friend I hadn't leaned on enough, and I thought about Marcus. I thought about his face when he read messages, about what he'd say if he knew I was leaving. I feared my son's disappointment more than any gossip. I don't want to break up the family, I said, my voice smaller. Dana answered immediately without hesitation. You're not breaking anything. You're protecting yourself. I didn't reply. I just nodded slowly, like someone finally accepting a truth he'd known for a long time. When Elaine helped me stand to get ready to leave the hospital, a sharp pain shot through my arm. My jacket sleeve slid up, revealing an old bruise on my forearm, yellow and purple, oval-shaped. I stared at it. The shape was frighteningly familiar. It looked exactly like fingerprints. That night I couldn't sleep. Elaine's living room was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, each second measured and deliberate. Every time the second hand reached 12, a hollow feeling spread through my chest. I sat in an armchair, hands resting on my knees, staring out the window, where a street light cast a pale yellow stripe across the wooden floor. I'd known this house for years, but I'd never needed it the way I did then. Elaine came out of the kitchen holding a small wooden box. I recognized it instantly. Evelyn used to keep it on the bookshelf, always carefully locked. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. Elaine set it on the table and sat across from me. She didn't speak right away. She unlocked it, the lid opening with a soft click, and took out a thick notebook with worn edges. She asked me to keep this, Elaine said, and to give it to you when the time came. I looked at the notebook, my throat suddenly dry. I didn't ask when the time was. I already knew. Elaine slid it toward me. It felt heavier than I expected when I picked it up, as if 3 years had condensed into something solid. I opened the first page. Elaine's handwriting, clear, straight, methodical. Each entry had a date, a time, a location, and a brief description. No emotion, no interpretation. Calvin arrived late because dinner time was changed without notice. Calvin was called senile in front of guests. Wedding photo of Calvin and Evelyn missing from shelf. I turned the page, then another. The lines were steady, clinical, almost like official reports. I saw my name repeated, saw incidents I'd once laughed off, moments I'd blamed on my own forgetfulness. Some entries had a small note added in the margin. Witness me or witness neighbor. My hands shook as I turned the pages, not from surprise but from confirmation. Everything I'd suspected and pushed aside was there, recorded by someone with no reason to exaggerate. Elaine stayed silent while I read. She didn't explain or justify. Only when I stopped on one page did she speak, her voice lower. Evelyn asked me to watch. She said she was afraid that after she was gone, you'd be taken advantage of. She knew you tend to endure. I closed my eyes. Evelyn's face came back to me clearly. The way she looked at me whenever I said, "It's fine." That mix of love and worry. I'd thought I was protecting family harmony. I never realized I was stripping away my last layer of protection. I turned to a page with a line underlined. Calvin was called useless because he no longer works. In the margin, Elaine had written, "He laughed, but his shoulders stiffened." I remembered that moment. I remembered my own laugh, a little too loud, like a reflex. I remembered going home that night and sitting in the garage for a long time, staring at my old tools, unsure whether to put them away or keep them. Evelyn talked to Marcus. Elaine continued gently but firmly. She was direct, but Marcus sided with his wife. I opened my eyes. That hurt in a different way. I had always believed Marcus didn't see it, not that he saw it, and chose another side. I thought of the times Evelyn tried to say something, then fell silent. I thought of how Marcus avoided the subject whenever I mentioned Tessa. I turned to the more recent pages. The handwriting grew denser, as if the incidents had become more frequent. Notes about tone, about looks, about how I appeared less and less at gatherings. Suddenly I understood. My disappearance hadn't been natural. It had been engineered. I looked up at Elaine. "The birthday party," I said hoarsely. It wasn't a joke. Elaine nodded. "It was a test," she said. "To see how you'd react, to see who the crowd would side with." I thought of the laughter, of how people needed an excuse to treat it as harmless, of how Tessa had done it in front of everyone without fear of consequences, because if I stayed silent, it would be taken as consent. Elaine straightened in her chair, her voice slowing. "There's one more thing," she said. "Lately, Marcus's house has been getting a lot of mail, thick envelopes, bank markings." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of mail?" I asked. "I didn't open them," Elaine said, "but I see them often and they're not advertisements." I leaned back, feeling a circle close. The humiliation, the isolation, the shove, and now money. It was no longer a series of unrelated events. It looked like a plan. "Don't do anything rash," Elaine said as soon as she saw my hands clench. "Don't confront them, don't call. This needs someone who understands the law." I took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm. I'd spent my life calculating load limits and assessing risk. For the first time, I needed to apply those skills to my own life. "A lawyer," I said, as if reminding myself. Elaine nodded. "Yes, someone independent, not a family friend." I looked down at the notebook in my hands. 3 years documented without missing a detail. Evelyn had prepared for this day in a way I never imagined. I felt protected and ashamed that I hadn't trusted my own instinct sooner. I closed the notebook and set it on the table. In the quiet room, I heard my own voice, unfamiliar but clear. "I'm afraid," I said. "I'm afraid they want to take my house." Saying it out loud lightened my chest, just a little, like finally admitting a crack I'd been trying to patch over for years. Elaine didn't dismiss it or offer empty comfort. She simply rested her hand on the notebook, confirming that my fear wasn't unfounded. Outside, the second hand kept moving. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel time passing me by. I had stopped, looked straight at what I'd been avoiding, and was preparing to move forward, not with silence, but with clarity. The next morning, Elaine drove me. The sky was a dull gray, the familiar kind of early winter gray in the suburbs. Not rain, not sun, just cold enough to make people pull their collars up and keep quiet. I sat in the passenger seat, hands on my lap, feeling as though I was carrying my old house in my chest. Elaine didn't turn on the radio. She understood some days need quiet. Harold Keene's office was on the second floor of an old red brick building, the wooden stairs creaking underfoot. A small brass plaque beside the door bore his name, the engraving worn smooth. When Elaine knocked, I took a deep breath, a habit from my old work before important inspections. I didn't know what I was preparing for, only that once I stepped through that door, things would no longer be vague. Harold Keene stood and shook my hand. He was a few years older than me, neatly cut gray hair, eyes, alert, but not sharp. His handshake was firm, just long enough. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice low and direct. Ella sat beside me, setting her bag down, still holding the notebook. Harold opened a clean file folder and set his pen on the desk. "I'm going to be direct," he said, not to scare you, but to save time. He asked about the house, whose name it was, and whether it was paid off, its estimated value. I answered each question, my voice steady, while my thoughts raced. The house, 37 years of living, paid off 15 years ago. Current value, I gave a conservative number, Harold wrote without looking up. "A will?" he asked. "I left it to Marcus," I said. And for the first time, my throat tightened. Clear's throat. I'd said those words for decades, never feeling their weight like I did then. Harold looked up. "Then it's bait," he said evenly. "Big bait." I blinked. Elaine gently squeezed my hand under the desk. Harold set his pen down. "If you were to die suddenly," he said, "or if someone convinced a court that you'd lost legal capacity control of your assets, would transfer legally. No break-ins, no violence, just paperwork." I sat still, listening to the clock tick. Each word landed cleanly like bolts tightened into steel. "Lost capacity," I repeated slowly. Harold nodded. "That's why I need to know everything. Abuse, threats, isolation. Investigators handle that side. I handle money." He placed his hand on the file. "And money leaves trails." He slid a form toward me. "I need your permission to run a credit check 3 to 5 years back. Loans, unfamiliar accounts, any transactions you didn't initiate." I looked at the signature line. My hand shook, not from fear of signing, but from the feeling that I was allowing someone to open the most private drawers of my life. I signed. Black ink spread across the page, still my handwriting, but it felt like control slipping from my fingers. Harold took the form and nodded once. "From now on," he said, "save every text, email, threat. Don't respond when emotional. Don't confront anyone alone. You have a team now." I looked at Elaine. "A team," I repeated. The word felt strange, but it straightened my spine. "We'll coordinate," Harold continued. "Investigators collect evidence of abuse. I collect financial evidence. They meet in court." Leaving the office, I felt tired in a different way, tired from clarity. Elaine suggested stopping at a small cafe nearby. I agreed. As steam rose from my coffee, I noticed my hands had stopped shaking. "You did the right thing," Elaine said quietly. "Evelyn would want this." I didn't answer right away. I thought of Evelyn, of the notebook, of how everything was beginning to take shape. Not accidents, not misunderstandings, a plan. That afternoon, I returned to my small apartment for now. I opened my laptop and followed Harold's list. Changed my email password, changed my bank password, activated 2-factor authentication, froze my credit, checked my identification, driver's license, social security card, all accounted for. But I photographed and stored copies in a secure folder. Each small action felt like laying a brick, rebuilding boundaries. My phone buzzed. An unread message from Tessa appeared. I didn't open it. I saved it. I took a screenshot. I did exactly what Harold said. Not because I was obedient, but because for the first time I felt the law would stand with me if I stood still in the right place. Dana called. Her voice was brief, professional. "You okay? I'm following the list," I said. Good, she replied. We're working in parallel. That evening, I sat by the window watching cars pass. I thought about Marcus. I thought about where my son stood on this map. If all of this was true, I didn't allow myself to conclude yet. Not yet. The next day passed in small tasks. Calls to banks, confirmations of freezes, reviews of transaction histories. Nothing jumped out at first. Part of me wanted to relax. Another part didn't. Harold had said, if they did it well, it'll look clean. Late in the afternoon, my phone rang. Harold's name flashed on the screen. I answered. Mr. Hargrove, he said. His voice was different. Gone was the steady cadence of someone explaining procedure. It was slower, heavier, as if each word had been weighed. I need you to sit down. I sat. There are loans, Harold continued. In your name. The room seemed to lose air. I heard my heartbeat loud enough to feel like it was knocking on the table. You're saying loans, I asked my voice. Yes, Harold said. More than one. There are records. We'll go over details in person, but you need to know this now. On paper, they exist. I looked at my hands. The old bruise on my wrist faded, but still they're shaped like fingerprints. I remembered the shove, the laughter, the thick envelopes, every piece locked into place, cold and precise. I never took out a loan. I said, not needing to prove it to anyone, just saying it out loud for myself. I know, Harold replied. And that's why we have to move very fast and very carefully. The call ended. I sat still for a long time. Then I stood up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back had aged a few years in just 2 days, but his eyes were different. No more avoiding. I picked up my phone and opened the archive folder. Every message, every screenshot, every note, I stopped asking why. I had only one question left, as clear as an engineering blueprint: how to stop it by the book at the right time. And for the first time, I believed I had an answer. I met Harold again the next morning. This time there was no coffee, no polite small talk. He set a thin folder in front of me, heavy in a different way, heavy with meaning. I sat down feeling like I was stepping into a lab where my own life would be taken apart with cold gloves. This is what we found within 24 hours, Harold said. He opened the folder and turned the pages slowly, giving me time to see and understand. 3 credit accounts, 2 personal loans, all in your name. I looked at the numbers. Not flashy, not the kind that knocks you back immediately, but large enough to crush someone living on a pension. I read the bank names, the account opening dates, the address, my address. The signature on the document slanted in a way that was terrifyingly familiar. That's not my signature, I said calmly. I had learned to say the most important things in an ordinary voice. Harold nodded. I know it's an imitation. Good but not perfect. He pointed out small details, the pressure, the spacing between letters. A forensic expert will confirm it. The issue is timing. He turned to another page. This one, he said, slowing down, is about to go past due 31 days. If it isn't paid, they can file to place a lien on the house. My ears rang. Not from shock, but because the full picture had finally come into focus. Debt in my name. I didn't know about it. When the debt piled up, when collection letters flooded in, someone would appear like a hero offering to help manage finances. Papers would be signed. Control would change hands legally. If I hadn't found out, I said slowly, they would have buried me in debt and then saved me. Harold didn't deny it. Correct. That's the model. Dana called just as I was leaving the office. We met in a quiet corner of the old hospital hallway, where the light wasn't too harsh and the familiar scent of disinfectant lingered. She listened as I summarized without interrupting. This is financial exploitation of an older adult, Dana said when I finished. Classic. It starts with isolation and humiliation, then low-level violence to test reactions. At the same time, they build paperwork. When the victim weakens, they move in. I remembered locked doors, changed meal times, missing belongings. I remembered the birthday party. I remembered that smile, the smile of someone who had already flipped the switch. Elaine arrived with Dana. She sat down, hands clasped. "I told you about the thick envelopes," she said. "Bank mail." I wasn't sure then, but now I am. Everything fit together in a chilling way. No longer scattered signs a diagram. I left the hospital with one question pounding in my head. I called Marcus. The phone rang, then stopped. I called again. This time it rang longer, but no one answered. I set the phone down, my chest burning. The old reflex of a father wanting to ask directly, wanting to believe that saying it out loud would fix everything. Harold texted, "Don't. Not without a plan." I took a deep breath. I was used to waiting for the right moment. In my old work, a rushed decision could bring down an entire bridge. It might not be just Tessa, I said to Dana, finally putting words to a thought that had been circling for a while. "Someone's guiding this." Dana nodded. "I think so too. We're verifying her relatives." She paused. "Tessa's mother, Monique Barlow." I'd heard that name once in an offhand conversation where Tessa mentioned her mother with a mix of respect and caution. Dana continued, her voice flat, but waited. "Her history is unclear. Multiple state moves, civil cases that went nowhere. We're digging." That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, the ceiling dark, street, light beams sweeping across it like a giant clock hand. One sentence repeated in my head, steady as a heartbeat. "They're trying to take my house with paperwork." I thought of every brick, every scratch on the railing, every winter I repaired the roof. I thought of Evelyn standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, smiling. I thought of Marcus as a boy running circles around the living room. All of that, if lost, wouldn't be lost to fire or flood. It would be lost to ink. Near midnight, my phone lit up. A new message from Tessa. I didn't open it right away. I let the screen glow for a few seconds, like staring at something dangerous from a safe distance. Then I opened it. 12 words. No more, no less. "If you keep going, you'll lose more than a house." I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. I saved it. I sent it immediately to Dina and Harold. That message, short bare, was no longer a vague threat. It was a golden piece, a direct line connecting abuse, intimidation, and motive. I set the phone down. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in days, I felt a strange calm. Not the calm of safety, but of clarity. I knew what I was facing. I knew what had to come next. And most importantly, I knew silence was no longer an option. Outside, the night was deep, but inside me, a blueprint was complete, detailed enough to begin building step by step, by the book at the right time. I didn't want to go back to that house. Just imagining myself standing in front of that familiar door made my chest feel like someone had set a stone on it. But I didn't have a choice. My heart medication was still in the kitchen cabinet at Marcus's place, and a few of Evelyn's keepsakes, small, irreplaceable things. I couldn't let them disappear again. Dana knew the plan. She told me to text when I arrived and when I left, and not to stay more than 15 minutes. "If there's any sign of escalation, you leave immediately," she said. I nodded, knowing that when facing my son, reason doesn't always listen. The sky was heavy when I arrived. The house still looked perfect from the outside. Trimmed lawns, spotless windows, a facade of stability. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again. This time the door flew open. Tessa stood there blocking the doorway like a gate. Her eyes were cold, lips tight. "You're not welcome," she said. "No pretense. You're making things up and hurting this family." "I'm just here to get my things," I said evenly. "And my medication." She gave a thin laugh. "Your things? Do you even know what's yours anymore?" Behind her in the darker hallway, I saw Marcus. My son leaned against the wall, as if he needed it to stay upright. His eyes were red, not the red of anger, but of sleeplessness. His hands trembled slightly, fingers curling and uncurling. "Marcus?" I said, not raising my voice. He flinched but didn't look at me. Light from the living room fell across his face, revealing deep shadows under his eyes. Tessa glanced at him, then back at me. "Don't talk to my husband," she said. "You've caused enough trouble." I took one slow step inside, just one. No touching, no provoking. And then I saw Marcus's wrist. His shirt sleeve was pulled up too far, revealing faint bruises, rounded paired fingerprints. My heart tightened like a fist closing around it. I remembered Dana's words. I remembered the files. I remembered the pattern. And for the first time I looked at my son not just as someone standing aside, but as someone trapped too. "I'm not here to argue," I said, "just to get my things." Tessa let out a sharp laugh. "You think you still get to demand anything?" She turned and called out loudly, "Marcus, go inside." He hesitated. She turned back, her voice dropping sharp as a blade. "Inside." He went without looking at me. The living room door closed, leaving Tessa and me facing each other in the hallway. "You should know your place," she said. "If you keep talking to the police, you won't see the kids again." The words hit me square in the chest. My grandchildren the afternoons teaching them puzzles, reading books. She knew exactly what to use as a weapon. "Do you understand?" she continued. "One phone call, and I'll make sure you disappear from their lives." I didn't respond. My phone stayed in my pocket, the recording app running. I looked at her, not defiant, not afraid, just looking at a truth that was already clear. She turned away, dragged a cardboard box out of the storage room, and dropped it on the floor in front of me. "Here," she said, "your stuff. Take it and go." I bent down. Inside were things thrown together carelessly. Evelyn's letters, wedding photos bent at the corners, a few old books. I searched quickly, my heart pounding. No medication. "Where's my medicine?" I asked. She shrugged. "No idea. Maybe you forgot to buy it." I knew it was a lie, but I didn't argue. I lifted the box, its weight heavy, not from contents, but from how the memories had been treated like trash. "You should leave," she said. "Right now." I nodded. I stepped back. I turned away. I said nothing more. In my mind, every word she'd spoken lined up neatly like evidence sealed in bags. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I set the box in the trunk. When I straightened up, I noticed a silver sedan parked not far away. I didn't know how long it had been there. Inside, an older woman sat in the driver's seat window halfway down. Her eyes were fixed on me, not curious, not accidental assessing Monique. No one needed to introduce her. There was a cold familiarity in the way she looked. Exactly like Tessa's, just older, sharper. I closed the trunk and looked straight back at her. She didn't look away. Her lips twitched just slightly. In that moment, every doubt vanished. Not one person, two generations. Same method. Hunters don't work alone. I got into my car and started the engine. As I pulled away, the sedan stayed put. No need to follow, she'd seen enough. Back at Elaine's, I set the box on the kitchen table. Elaine looked at my face and didn't ask questions. She poured me a glass of water. I drank, my hands trembling lightly as the adrenaline drained away. "There's more," she said. "I know," I replied. I sent the audio recording to Donna and Harold. I sent the photo of the bruises on Marcus's wrist, taken quickly from a distance, but clear enough. I sent a description of the car and the woman inside it. Each message felt like laying another stone in the foundation. Night fell. I sat alone in the living room, the box open in front of me. I took out Evelyn's letters one by one, smoothing the creases. I apologized to her in silence for not seeing sooner, for letting our son get caught in this grip. At exactly midnight, my phone vibrated. I saw the name on the screen and my heart sped up. Marcus, I answered without saying hello. Dad? His voice came through small and broken, like someone running afraid of being heard. Dad, I'm not at the house anymore. I stood up fast. Where are you? I can't say, he whispered. But listen to me. I'm scared. I'm really scared. I closed my eyes, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Are you safe? Not yet, he said. But I have to tell you before I don't get another chance. I heard his breathing fast and shallow. Outside, the night was still. But I knew that from this moment on, everything had shifted. This was no longer just about me being targeted. My son was trying to escape too, and I wasn't going to let him run alone. Rain started falling the moment I opened the door. Not a downpour, but a cold, steady rain that soaks you slowly without noticing. Marcus stood on Elaine's front steps, his dark coat-drenched hair plastered to his forehead. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He took one step inside, then his legs gave out as if all his strength had drained away. I caught my son before he hit the floor. Elaine was right behind me, already pulling a chair close. Marcus sat down, head bowed, hands covering his face. The sobs came out soundless, just broken, heavy breaths, the kind of crying that comes from holding too much in for too long. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I didn't ask why. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling how thin it had gotten under the wet coat. I said one sentence slow and clear. You're here now. No one can hurt you in this house. Elaine brought towels and draped one over Marcus's back, then stepped away. She understood that some moments need space. Marcus looked up. His eyes were bloodshot dark circles deep. 6 months ago. He began, his voice shaky but no longer breaking. Tessa threw a small party. Just a few people. I thought it was to celebrate her new contract. I listened without interrupting. She kept pouring drinks, Marcus said it was to relax. I was stupid. I drank. He swallowed hard. When my head was spinning, she brought out a stack of papers. Said it was restructuring family loans. Bank paperwork needed a witness signature. My hands went cold. I couldn't read. He continued. The words were jumping. She pointed to where I needed to sign, said everything was fine. Then her mother, Monique, was standing in the corner holding a phone. Marcus stopped. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. She was recording, Marcus said quietly, recording every signature. Recording my face. Recording me smiling like an idiot. Recording me signing like an idiot. I closed my eyes for a brief second just to stay upright. After that, Marcus continued. When I found out the truth, Tessa showed me the video. She said if I said a word, they'd give it to the police. They'd say I was an accomplice. That I knew exactly what it was that I signed to help take your property. He looked at me, panic filling his eyes. I was scared, Dad. I thought about the kids. If I went to prison, she'd take everything. I opened my eyes and looked at my son. Not a traitor. A man cornered, manipulated through his own trust and love. My signature, Marcus said, his voice dropping, appears on the loan files in your name. The line marked witness, I saw it. The room seemed to tilt, but I didn't let myself fall. You're a victim, I said clearly, not the perpetrator. Marcus broke down again, this time without covering his face. You don't understand, he said. I let them do this to you. I pulled him close and held him tight. You were trapped, I said. Just like me. After a moment, Marcus took a thin envelope from his jacket pocket. I brought a few things, he said. I didn't dare bring much. Inside were printed emails exchanges between Tessa and an unknown address discussing files and timing. There were also photos of a drawer in Tessa's office. Inside, I saw photocopies of documents in my name, my driver's license, my social security number, My address all neatly arranged like materials in a supply room. I took the pictures while she was out, Marcus said. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't take it anymore. I nodded. You did the right thing. Marcus took a deep breath. There's one more thing, he said. Tessa is preparing a story. She says she'll make people believe you threatened the family, that you lost control after Mom died. She said all she has to do is plant enough doubt and no one will listen to you anymore. I wasn't surprised. I only felt everything click into place as precise as my old blueprints. When the load concentrates at one point, the bridge collapses exactly as calculated. We won't let that happen, I said. But we have to do it the right way. The three of us, me, Marcus, and Elaine, sat together, laying out each piece of evidence on the table. I called Harold. He picked up immediately, his voice steady. Marcus will act normal, I said. Stay at home, no change in routine. Quietly collect whatever's still missing. Harold was silent for a second. All right, he said. We'll lock the roots. He explained quickly, freezing credit at the highest level, alerting the relevant banks, filing fraud notices, preparing emergency motions if there was any attempt to transfer assets or place a lien. Each step was like a valve, closing, tightening the flow. Dana stepped in as well. She coached Marcus on secure communication, on logging times, on not revealing that evidence was being gathered. As normal as possible, she said, that's the best armor right now. The rain eased. Marcus stood up and put his jacket back on. Before leaving, he turned to me. Dad, he said, I'm scared. That's natural, I replied. But you're not alone. When the door closed, the house grew quiet again. I sat down, exhaustion washing over me, but not the kind that knocks you down. It was the fatigue of someone holding a structure steady before a storm. 2 days later, the envelope arrived. Not a handwritten letter, not a bill, a letter from a law firm. The language was cold, concise, designed to apply pressure. I read every line. Accusations that I had threatened, harassed, lost emotional control. A demand that I cease all contact or they would proceed with further legal action. A mini PR strike, as Harold called it, not public, not yet just enough to create a record to plant doubt. I set the letter on the table beside the evidence we already had. This time my hands didn't shake. I felt a cold clarity. They had made their move. And as any good hunter knows, when the prey starts to fight back, the game enters its decisive phase. I texted Harold one short sentence. It's time. The law firm's letter had arrived on a cold morning, just as I set my coffee cup down on the table. Thick envelope, stiff paper, sharp print. I opened it and read slowly, line by line, as if reading a technical report, except this time the subject wasn't a bridge or a roadway, but me. They accused me of harassment. They claimed I was threatening obsessive intrusive toward family life. They demanded that I cease all contact, attaching the threat of seeking a restraining order. And then buried in the dry legal language came a passage clearly meant to shock. Tessa claimed she was pregnant or suffering from a serious illness requiring special protection, and said my actions had caused her severe emotional distress. Every detail was carefully chosen like stones, placed precisely to make the reader hesitate. I set the letter down. My hands were cold, not from fear, but from recognizing their speed. This move wasn't aimed at the truth. It was aimed at outsiders' emotions and at time. Harold came that same day. He read the letter and nodded slowly. This is Darvo, he said. Deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. When they're cornered, they turn themselves into the victims and you into the perpetrator. I understood. Throughout my career, I'd seen structures that looked solid collapse when the direction of force shifted. This was the same. They weren't arguing facts. They were changing the axis. Less than 24 hours later, that pivot became unmistakable. Tessa filed for emergency guardianship. Her claim I was cognitively impaired, no longer capable of managing my finances and medical decisions, and a potential danger to myself and others. As Harold read the notice aloud, a wave of heat ran up my spine. If I lost, I would lose access to my accounts, lose the right to make medical decisions, lose the right to say no to any document placed in front of me, and my house. The house I had fully paid off would become a line item in someone else's file. I panicked for a few short minutes. I admit that. I stepped into the backyard and stood there looking at wet leaves clinging to the steps. I thought of Evelyn. I thought about being labeled confused just because someone needed paperwork. Losing my voice felt more terrifying than any bruise. Dana called. Her voice didn't allow me to drift into fear. "You need an independent capacity evaluation immediately," she said. "No waiting, no arguing. We bring the truth into the light before they finish drawing their story." The checklist became clear. Professional history, daily routines, medication schedule, how I managed my finances, recent decisions. Everything had to be clean, coherent, able to stand under scrutiny. I met Dr. Simone Claney that afternoon. Her office was bright, large windows overlooking bare trees. She shook my hand, her gaze direct, not judgmental. "We'll take our time," she said. "No rush." The evaluation lasted longer than I expected. Not simple questions. She asked me to describe my career projects I'd led, how I analyzed risk, how I made decisions when data conflicted. I talked about bridges, about calculating load, not just by numbers, but by human behavior. She asked how I managed money. I explained how I tracked spending, how I spotted irregularities. She posed hypothetical scenarios, changed contexts, watched how I responded. I grew tired at times, but I didn't drift. I didn't confuse things. I felt myself return to a familiar place. A person being asked to think, not to ask permission. When it ended, Dr. Clean set down her pen. "You are fully competent," she said. "Sharp thinking, good insight, no signs of decline." She promised to send the report to the court that same day. I left her office feeling lighter, not from victory, but because a door had been locked just in time. Meanwhile, Marcus did his part. He acted normal, went to work, came home, gave short answers, and then he found what they were using to gain sympathy. No miracles, receipts, prescriptions printed in color, purchased from places with no corresponding medical records. Edited photos, wrong lighting, mismatched metadata, a compassion play, built like a backdrop, not reality. Marcus sent everything to Harold. I could feel the tension in my son's messages. Not fear, but the strain of walking a tightrope. I replied with one short line. "I'm proud of you." Harold began the counterattack by the book. He filed motions to dismiss the guardianship petition, attached the independent evaluation. He requested protective orders to preserve assets, no transfers, no liens, no changes to beneficiaries. Each document filed was a brake, applied keeping the wheels from spinning off the axle. I waited. Waiting didn't mean doing nothing. It meant preparing. I organized Evelyn's papers, reset photographs, logged dates and emotions, not to let them drive decisions, but to remember where I stood. That evening, Dana called. This time her voice was different, not rushed, but heavy. "We verified Monique," she said. "Not just one victim. There's a pattern. Same method, different states." I leaned back in my chair. "What level?" I asked. "Potentially federal," Dana replied. "We need a few more pieces, but the direction is clear." I looked out the window, and the sky was dark, but not as dense as in the days before. I understood that their pivot, calling me impaired, seeking guardianship, wasn't the end. It was a sign of desperation when the old paths were blocked. I stopped thinking about proving I wasn't confused. I thought about holding my ground, about placing the truth where it belonged, and about how, when the wheels are blocked, those who rely on shortcuts reveal themselves. I I set my phone down and took a deep breath. This wasn't over. But for the first time, I knew exactly where I stood and why I wasn't moving. Elaine was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. She wasn't sitting. She stood leaning against the counter, both hands resting on an ivory-cold envelope yellowed with age. In the top left corner was familiar handwriting. Evelyn's. My heart slowed as if a lock had just clicked into place. She told me, Elaine said softly, to give this to you only if things became dangerous. I didn't ask anything else. I took the envelope. The paper was thick, the edges softened from being handled. I opened it slowly, afraid of tearing something fragile. Inside was a neatly folded handwritten letter and a small flash drive labeled in blue ink. E. I opened the letter first. The faint scent of old paper rose. So Evelyn. The handwriting was steady, unhurried. Calvin. If you're reading this, it means I was right to worry. I wish I had been wrong. I tried to tell you, but I know you. You always want to believe the best in people. That's why I left this. Not so you could seek revenge. So you could be safe. I paused and took a deep breath. My throat tightened, but my hands stayed steady. I hired an investigator not out of baseless suspicion, but because I saw familiar signs others tend to overlook. I didn't tell you so you wouldn't live in fear. If that day comes, use what I left. I love you. I set the letter down and looked at the flash drive. Elaine handed me her laptop. I plugged it in. A folder appeared neatly organized. Names, dates, notes. Evelyn had done everything her way, orderly, discreet, sufficient. I opened the first file, a report clearly titled Investigator's Name Raphael Stone. The pages that followed laid out timelines, not ours, but others, other families, other states, the same pattern. Accounts drained slowly, small amounts each time, enough to avoid attention. Documents assisted into being signed when victims were tired, drunk, or confused. Guardianship petitions filed during crisis, padded with emotional narratives. Then, assets legalized through court decisions, proper process, proper signatures, false premises. I kept reading. Monique's name appeared in different roles, sometimes a family advisor, sometimes a support person. Tessa, in several cases, was a new relative, a partner. I understood this wasn't their first time, not a trial run. It was a profession. One note made me stop. Husband is often isolated first. Children are forced to choose sides. Victim is described as difficult or declining. I closed my eyes. Evelyn had seen it all and still chose to protect me even after she was gone. I called Harold. He arrived within an hour. He read without interruption. When he closed the laptop, he exhaled slowly, like someone who'd just seen the final piece. This is what locks them in, Harold said. Not just for your case, for the others too. Dana came shortly after. She skimmed the file's flagged sections for escalation. We'll coordinate, she said. Reopen old cases, connect the dots. This isn't a family dispute anymore. Marcus came that evening. He brought an old phone one he'd hidden. Inside was the video from the party 6 months earlier, grainy but clear enough. Drinks being poured, papers, laid out, a finger pointing where to sign Monique. Standing behind phone, raised chaotic sound, laughter, clinking glasses, and then the signature. I kept it, Marcus said. I was scared, but I didn't delete it. Harold nodded. This is the nail, he said. It breaks the accomplice claim. Over the next few days, the atmosphere shifted. Tessa began to unravel. Neighbors called Elaine saying they'd seen her arguing on the street. Voice raised, fingers pointing, sometimes shouting at strangers. Once she slammed a car door so hard, someone had to intervene. The mask was slipping. I stayed away. I didn't need to be close. I'd learned that sometimes distance is the clearest vantage point. Then the call came from Harold late one afternoon. His voice was calm, but there was a distinct crease to it. The crease of news that couldn't wait. A prosecutor has taken the file, he said. Their drafting arrest warrants could come very fast. I looked out the window. The last light of day slanted through the bare trees stretching across the table. I thought of Evelyn, her letter, her quiet preparation. I thought about how I'd been protected. What do I need to do? I asked. You do exactly what you're doing, Harold replied. No contact document. Wait. I hung up and stood there for a moment. No triumph, no fear, just a deep stillness, the feeling of someone who has set the final pillars before a bridge opens to traffic. That night I reread Evelyn's letter and placed it beside the flash drive. Two small objects, but heavy enough to hold an entire truth in place. I turned off the lights. In the dark, I whispered only to myself, I'm safe now. And for the first time since the storm began, I believed it. That morning I woke before the alarm went off. Not from nerves, but because my body had learned to wake itself when something important was coming. It was still dark. Street lights cast thin, fragile streaks across the wooden floor through the curtains. Elaine was already up. I could hear the kettle softly hissing in the kitchen. Everything felt normal in a way that was almost unnatural. Then a siren sounded on the street outside. Not a single siren, several of them decisive, rhythmic. I stood up and walked slowly to the window. Under the pale, yellow street lights, I saw cars parked in formation doors, swinging open figures moving quickly and efficiently. There was no chaos, no hesitation. Everything unfolded like a procedure that had been carefully rehearsed. Across town, Tessa was called out onto the front porch. She was still wearing pajamas, her hair unbrushed, her face draining of color when she saw the badges on the uniforms in front of her. She began yelling almost immediately, sentences overlapping, disordered, full of rage and panic. She said she was being framed, said I was a vindictive enemy, said this was a conspiracy by an old man who couldn't accept the truth. When the handcuffs closed around her wrists, the sound of metal clicking together rang out clearly like a cold, full stop. Tessa began to cry. The tears came fast, her voice turning shaky and weak. A familiar performance. A few neighbors stopped to watch. Some turned away. Some shook their heads. No one said a word. Almost at the same time somewhere else, Monique was stopped as she was walking out of a shopping center parking lot. Her reaction was completely different. No yelling, no tears, just eyes darting quickly, calculating, as if searching for an escape route. When her arm was grabbed, she tried to step back, tried to twist away, a small, instinctive reflex of someone used to slipping free at the last second. But this time there was no gap. When Harold called me, his voice was low but clear. They've been arrested, he said. And because the money moved across state lines and the forged documents involve federal credit institutions, the case has been elevated. This is no longer a civil or family dispute. I hung up and sat down. There was no sense of victory, just a strange quiet, like when a long rain finally stops, leaving behind air heavy with the smell of wet earth. The trial took place publicly a few weeks later. The courtroom was large, the ceiling high, white lights evenly illuminating the rows of hard wooden benches. I sat with Elaine and Marcus. In front of me, Tessa sat at the defense table trying to keep her back straight but her shoulders rigid. Monique sat behind her, her face colder, more expressionless, but her eyes never leaving the people coming and going. The prosecutor didn't begin with a dramatic story. They began with structure. Layer by layer, the evidence was presented slowly, methodically, like building a bridge in front of the jury. Elaine's logbooks, dates, times, incidents, witnesses, no emotion, no speculation. Just the steady repetition of small actions stretched over years. Medical records came next. The doctor explained impact angles, injury locations inconsistent with ordinary accidents. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Then came the signature analysis. The expert pointed out tiny discrepancies. The pressure on the final stroke, the spacing between letters, things ordinary people don't notice. But a genuine surveyor never changes. Each detail was like a small nail driven into the larger picture. Bank data appeared on the large screen. Small withdrawals, regular low enough not to trigger immediate alerts. Loans opened quietly. Money flowing through multiple accounts. Multiple states, no chaos, very clean. Then the video was played. The party, the alcohol, the paper placed on the table, the finger pointing to where to sign. Monique standing behind phone, raised, not hiding it. The courtroom fell silent. No further explanation was needed. Old investigation files were introduced last. Other names, other states, the same pattern, the same approach, the same outcome assets, legalized. Marcus was called to testify. I watched my son walk to the stand, his hands trembling slightly, but his back straight. He admitted his mistake, that he signed while intoxicated, that he stayed silent out of fear of losing his children. He didn't shift blame. He spoke only of fear and how that fear had been turned into a tool. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the stand with a familiar feeling, like standing before a technical review board. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse with emotion. I testified like a bridge builder, from foundation to pier, from pier to beam, from beam to deck. I spoke about the small details that, taken alone, seemed insignificant, but when assembled became impossible to deny. I spoke slowly. I paused at the right moments. I let the evidence speak. The expert witnesses that followed completed the structure. The physician, the handwriting analyst, the data specialist, each added another load-bearing layer. The defense's case began to fracture, not because it was attacked, but because it no longer had anywhere to stand. Tessa tried to pivot to emotion. She spoke about her children, about being misunderstood, about pressure. But then the video was played again. The documents were enlarged, the timeline laid out clearly. The sympathy narrative lost its weight in the face of consistent data. Monique stayed silent longer. When she finally spoke, her words were calculated, but too late. The past cases were raised. Other victims named, the network exposed. The verdict was read without fanfare. Serious charges for Monique for her organizing role, the repeated pattern, the number of victims. Tessa received a prison sentence for fraud, forgery, threats, and elder exploitation. Assets and money were seized for restitution. There was no cheering, no one stood to applaud. Just the sound of the gavel striking the bench, once dry and final. As people began to stand, I remained seated. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel immediate relief. I just felt empty, as if a stone had been lifted from my chest, but the indentation it left was still there. Elaine placed her hand over mine. Marcus stood beside me and let out a long breath. The breath of someone who has survived prolonged suffocation. Stepping out of the courthouse, the afternoon sunlight was gentler than I expected. I looked up at the sky, not searching for any sign. There was none, and I realized justice doesn't always bring a sense of victory. Sometimes it simply gives you back the right to breathe normally. I turned to Marcus. "Let's go home," I said. And for the first time in years, the word home no longer felt tied to fear. I left the old house on a quiet morning, when dew still clung to the steps, and sunlight had only just reached the trees at the end of the driveway. I didn't take much with me. Most things had been sold, given away, or left for people who needed them more than I did. There were a few things I kept. A watch that had belonged to Evelyn, a few books she loved, and a small framed photo of us by the lake, one autumn long ago. That house had once been what I called home, but it was also where I learned the most painful lesson of my life. I knew I had to leave, not to run from the memories, but so the memories would no longer control every breath I took. I moved to a small cabin near a lake in Michigan, a place Evelyn once said, "If we ever get the chance, I want us to grow old here." The cabin isn't large, but it's full of light. Every morning I open the window and listen to the wind moving through the pines, the lake rippling gently. No constant traffic noise, no watchful eyes, just a quiet I had forgotten existed. The first few nights I still startled awake a lingering reflex from living under constant tension. But gradually sleep came deeper, steadier. I began to remember what it felt like to sleep without worrying about what might happen in the morning. Marcus began again too. Slowly, not easily. He entered therapy, week after week. He learned to face his fear instead of avoiding it, without deflection, without blame. He learned how to be a real father, not through promises or hollow apologies, but through time presence and responsibility. He took modest jobs, paying his way with labor, not titles. There were days he was exhausted, days he wanted to quit. I didn't rescue him. I simply stayed nearby, close enough for him to know that someone wouldn't turn away when things became hard. Elaine remained there not because I was weak, but because all of us need someone willing to face the truth. She visited a few times, bringing homemade apple pie and small stories from the old neighborhood. We sat on the cabin porch watching the lake change color in the evening light. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. Her presence reminded me that community-decent neighbors can sometimes be the first and most important barrier against harm. I reset everything related to my finances, not out of fear, but out of respect for myself. I appointed the right people, updated my will, clearly activated credit alerts, stored documents securely. I relearned a lesson that should have been obvious. Transparency and preparation aren't pessimism. They're freedom. When things are in their proper place, I no longer have to think about them every day. I can spend my energy on things worth living for: reading, walking, and occasionally cooking dishes Evelyn used to love. There's something I want to say plainly and slowly about shame. Shame keeps victims silent. Silence makes predators stronger. I used to think enduring was keeping the peace, that staying quiet was protecting the family. The truth is the opposite. The quieter you are, the more the truth gets twisted. The more you speak in the right way, the more paths the truth finds. Speaking up doesn't mean shouting. It means documenting, finding the right people, and placing evidence where it belongs. I've learned that courage isn't loud, it's durable. If you're listening to this story, I want you to take away a few very concrete things that can help in real life. Watch for signs of elder abuse, sudden isolation, repeated jokes that cause harm, unusual changes in finances, or someone else suddenly controlling documents and decisions. Keep evidence texts, emails, dated notes, even if you don't yet know when you'll need them. Seek medical and legal support early. An independent evaluation can protect your voice. And don't underestimate the role of neighbors and community people who don't look away when something feels wrong. The story in this video is a fictional story inspired by real-life situations and human experiences, created to offer moral value, life lessons, and emotional connection for viewers. It does not encourage imitation of any actions shown, does not incite harm, and does not target any individual or organization. I believe the most important lessons we can take from it are: 1. Don't dismiss jokes that hurt someone. 2. Trust your instincts when you see an older person being isolated. And 3. Evidence combined with speaking up in the right way can save a life and sometimes an entire family from falling into the hands of a predator. If you or someone you love is in a similar situation, please reach out to appropriate support services in your area. Talk to a family doctor, a lawyer, or an elder protection agency. Help exists. Sometimes it only takes one first step to find it. This afternoon, I stood on the cabin porch, looking out over the calm lake. The breeze was cool, the scent of pine faint in the air. For the first time in a long while, I took a deep breath without feeling afraid. I thought about the road behind me, scarred, and the road ahead no longer as unclear as it once was. Where are you watching this story from? What city or what country? Tell me in the comments below if this story resonated with you. Please tap like so it can reach others who may need to hear it. And if you want to follow my journey as I rebuild my life from the rubble, subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your listening is what gives stories like this meaning. I remind myself softly like a vow. I didn't win because I was stronger than them. I won because I stopped staying silent.